Nobody touched his son. Nobody came close. No one dared even breathe in the same space as that boy, not because he was dangerous, but because he was too fragile to exist in his father's world. Luca was 8 years old, blind, and lived surrounded by shadows he couldn't see, but could feel. I felt everything. The fear of the security guards, the father's anxiety, the heavy silence of the house, and the distance that everyone thought they needed to keep, until the night he walked into a random diner and found the only person who didn't back down. An exhausted waitress, her apron stained and her life slowly crumbling, did what no one had ever dared to do before, allowed him to see his face through his hands. And in that instant, at the tips of that boy's fingers, something happened. He smiled. He took a deep breath. He found light in the darkness. And his father saw. He saw that his son, who wouldn't let anyone near him, who did not accept touch, who lived trapped within silence and fear, she opened her heart to a stranger. But what nobody knew was that, at the moment Luca touched her face, his father's world, the world of the Mafia, revenge, blood, and debt, also caught up with him. And now there are too many people interested in this woman. People who shouldn't even know her name, much less recognize her voice, or leave notes on the door of the house where the young daughter sleeps. Prepare yourself. This is not just the story of a blind boy finding light. It's the story of an ordinary woman being pulled into a universe where love saves, and the wrong touch can start a war. The diner where I worked always smelled of burnt coffee, old grease, and dreams that never made it past the revolving door. It was the kind of place where truck drivers, night shift workers, and weary souls sat in silence, as if the world outside was too noisy to face without a sip of weak coffee. I was on my 3rd shift in a row, my shirt sticking to my back, my apron stained with ketchup, and a burning urge to cry that I pushed back every time I took another order. But that day, when the door opened and an eerie silence settled in, I knew, even before hearing footsteps, that someone who didn't belong there had just walked in, and that, in a way I didn't yet understand, my life was about to be divided into before and after. 3 men in suits walked through the door first, making their way through as if the air belonged to them. They were tall, serious, their eyes too attentive to be there just for the menu. One of them glanced at the counter, the tables, the exits, as if memorizing escape routes, but what really made my heart race was the boy behind them, about 8, maybe 9 years old, with dark straight hair falling over his eyes. He held his folding cane firmly, but the way his hand trembled betrayed his insecurity. That's when I realized he was blind, and yet he walked with the precision of someone who had memorized the world's landscape by touch. He didn't look anywhere, of course, but he seemed to feel every gaze that landed on him, as if he lived on the margins of everything, including the sight he lacked. And then he came, the man behind him, the reason even the wall clock seemed to stop. Tall, in a dark suit that looked too expensive for that place, neatly trimmed beard, rigid posture. But it wasn't the clothes. It wasn't the body. It was the look. The kind of look that not only sees you, but assesses, weighs, measures, and decides what part of his life you can or cannot enter. He placed his hand on the boy's shoulder, a firm gesture of silent protection that contrasted with his severe expression. The Mafia boss. I didn't need an introduction. The whole city knew who he was, even if no one dared say his name too loudly. And in that instant, I understood why everyone moved away when he passed by. Because even the innocent seemed to carry sins near him. I was at the checkout counter when one of the security guards pointed to the corner table, the most isolated one, the only one without bad lighting or wobbly chairs. They wanted privacy. I wanted to survive my shift. But when the boy stopped beside the table, hesitant, his cane lightly tapping the chair legs, something about him hit me like a punch in the gut. It wasn't pity, it was recognition. The kind of recognition that arises when you see someone trying to exist in a world that insists on being too difficult. He reached out, trying to find the back of the chair. The security guards waited. The father waited. And I couldn't wait. I went to him before anyone could say anything. I lightly touched his hand, guiding it to the chair. "Here," I murmured. He froze for a second, the kind of freeze someone unaccustomed to being touched gently experiences. His hand was small, warm, fragile in a way that didn't match his father's name. He sat down slowly, as if calculating the space around him. His father watched everything, his eyes fixed, like someone trying to understand an equation that never adds up. I didn't look back at him. I couldn't, not without feeling my bones vibrate. "What's your name?" I asked the boy, in a tone lighter than I felt myself. He turned his face toward my voice, his dull eyes searching for a point that didn't exist. "Luca," he answered softly. It was a beautiful, gentle, almost shy voice. His father clenched his jaw, as if he hadn't expected his son to answer someone so quickly. "Nice to meet you, Luca," I replied. "I'm Anna," and that's when it happened. Luca extended his hand, not to greet me, but to familiarize himself with the surroundings. The tips of his fingers brushed my forearm by accident, and he recoiled, surprised, as if he had put his hand in a forbidden place. His father took a step forward, protectively, but Luca only murmured, "Sorry, sometimes I need to feel." None of the adults at that table seemed ready for that statement, the father even less so. The air grew heavy, tense, almost indignant, not with the boy, with the involuntary revelation. Luca kept his hand tucked away, close to his chest, as if he had made a mistake. I smiled, not a big childish smile, but a small, calm smile, as if to say, "It's okay, I'm here." "You can feel it," I replied, extending my hand slowly. He hesitated for only half a second before touching it, first the tips of his fingers, then the palm, and then he traced my face for the first time, slowly, respectfully, curiously, as if he were putting together a puzzle that no one had let him touch before. The silence at that table grew so profound, it felt like an abyss. The father watched every movement, not with anger, but with astonishment, as if he himself had never allowed it, as if no one had ever allowed it. And then Luca murmured, almost with a smile, "You seem kind." The phrase struck me. The father's hand gripped the back of the chair. He didn't say anything, but his gaze said it all. No one spoke to his son like that. No one touched his son like that. No one had permission. And yet, there I was, a waitress in a stained apron, with a delayed salary, accumulated fears, and a daughter sleeping at home while I served coffee. And that boy was recognizing my face from the inside, not the outside. When Luca pulled his hand away, his father finally spoke. His voice was deep, controlled, with something dangerous hidden between the lines. "He doesn't do this to anyone." I swallowed hard. "I just helped." He tilted his head, analyzing my face as if trying to understand what I had that others didn't. "He doesn't touch anyone," he repeated, as if that were the important part. "He doesn't trust. He doesn't let you." His gaze narrowed. "But he let you." That wasn't a compliment. It was an observation, research, silent investigation, the kind of interest you don't want to arouse in someone like him. Matthias, one of the cooks, hurriedly called me to get another order, but I couldn't move. His father took a step toward me. It wasn't a threat. It was a studied approach, measured. He didn't touch me, but it felt like he did. "Why did he do that?" he asked. There was no anger in the question. There was need. A need so deep it almost hid the fear. "Because I spoke to him," I replied simply. "Because I existed on his level." He analyzed my words as if testing the truth from within. "People often speak too loudly to him," I continued, "or with too much pity." Luca turned his face to me and smiled again. His father saw, and something in him changed. I expected him to thank me, or to tell me to leave, or to pretend nothing had happened, but he did something entirely different. He sat down. While the security guards remained standing, rigid, he simply sat, at the table, in my world, as if he wanted to examine the environment that had allowed his son something as simple as touching a face without fear. "Luca," he said in an extremely controlled tone, "do you want to stay here for a while?" The boy nodded. I didn't understand. I didn't know if it was a test, a trap, or just a father accepting for the first time a space that wasn't his. But I stayed. I served water, I served food, I served silence, because that's what they needed. The entire diner pretended to work while glancing sideways. Everyone knew who he was. Everyone knew that any wrong move could be very costly. But paradoxically, sitting at the table with him didn't scare me. It gave me a strange sense of responsibility, as if that child had pulled an invisible thread that now connected my life to theirs, a thread that couldn't be cut simply because it was difficult. And the father realized this. He realized it before I did, perhaps, because after long minutes of silent observation, he said something that sent shivers down my spine. "What's your name?" he asked, still looking at me. "Anna," I replied, my voice firmer than I felt. He nodded slowly, as if confirming a decision. Anna, he repeated, testing my name against his lips. From today on, no one comes near him without you around. I didn't answer, not because I didn't want to, but because deep down, I already knew. That wasn't a request. It was the beginning of everything that would come after. I couldn't sleep that night. After my shift ended and the diner finally closed, I sat on the kitchen floor, still with my stained apron, trying to understand what had happened. No one had ever pulled me to the center of anything in my life. I'd always been the one who served water, cleaned tables, collected dishes, smiled even with a headache, paid overdue bills, and waited for the month to turn over to try again. But Luca had touched my face as if he were discovering a new piece of the world, and his father had looked at me as if I were a password no one could decipher. I didn't know if it was a blessing, a curse, or both. I only knew that my life, once so small, now seemed too big to fit inside me. I went back to work the next day, trying to act like it was a normal day, but everyone in the kitchen looked at me as if I'd been hit by a meteor. Anna, you know who that man was, right? Asked Julia, the only one who dared to speak without fear. I shrugged. I know enough. Her eyes widened. And you let his son touch your face? I laughed nervously. I let a child starved for physical contact recognize a person. But the truth is, I was scared too. Not of Luca. Never of Luca. But of his father. Of the way he looked at me, as if he'd found a rare gem in a place he never expected to look. The sound of the door opening cut through the conversation. I turned to see, and silence fell like a curtain. Again, as if the whole world had learned to react to him before reacting to its own heart. Enzo entered slowly, unhurriedly, without making a fuss. But, in that small space, each of his steps seemed to displace the air. Today, however, he was alone. No bodyguards, no shadow of an army, just him. And that, somehow, was even more intimidating. He walked to the counter as if he had come to retrieve something that belonged to him. "Where's Luca?" I asked before even thinking. He looked up, and, for the first time, there was something resembling vulnerability in his eyes. "He asked for you," he replied, in a tone that left me breathless. It wasn't an order. It wasn't intimidation. It was a statement of fact. A blind boy who barely touched other people had asked for me. I felt something breaking and rearranging itself inside my chest. "Is he in the car?" I asked. "No," Enzo said. "He's at school, but he woke up in the middle of the night groping around in bed and asked about you, and I didn't know what to say." Hearing that from the man everyone feared was like hearing thunder apologizing for making noise. Unsettling. Too human. He continued more quietly. "He asked if you were real, if you were going to disappear." I took a deep breath. "He's afraid of losing his bearings," I explained. "When the world blinds us, all that's left is touch and voice." Enzo narrowed his eyes. "I thought you were just a waitress." "I am," I replied firmly. "But I'm also someone who knows how to recognize loneliness." He didn't argue. He didn't smile. He didn't look away. He stared at me with a kind of silent analysis that made me want to turn my face away, and at the same time, couldn't. Then he said something that made the ground disappear beneath my feet. "He wants to see you." The verb came out naturally, and then he corrected himself. "He wants to feel you again." Before I could answer, the door opened again and someone rushed in, almost blowing the wind into the diner. It was one of yesterday's security guards. His face was firm, tense. He approached Enzo and whispered something in his ear. The Mafia boss's body stiffened. The air changed. The whole atmosphere became heavy. The security guard looked at me for a second, and the way he looked wasn't contempt. It was recognition, as if I had just been pulled into territory that wasn't mine. "What happened?" I asked, feeling a chill run down my spine. Enzo answered with stark truth. "Someone tried to follow Luca's car today." My throat went dry. "Is he all right?" Enzo nodded. "For now." "For now" was the most terrifying expression anyone could use with a child involved. "Why would they try to follow him?" I asked, even knowing he wouldn't answer. But he did, with an honesty that felt like a knife. "Because he's my son." The words hung between us like a threat, a promise, and a warning. He took a deep breath. "And because now they know he's getting close to you." I froze. He wasn't saying it maliciously. He was saying it out of reality, the kind of reality you can't look away from. Then I should distance myself, I concluded, trying to protect what little remained of my normal life. But his gaze hardened, not with anger, with refusal. "If you distance yourself, he'll get worse." The sentence fell too heavily on my chest. "I'm not treatment, Enzo." He took a step closer, then another. That's exactly what you are. The silence that followed felt like a minefield. Not because I want to, he continued, but because he decided. And his decisions are the only ones I respect without question. My throat tightened. I was just a woman trying to pay bills, raise my daughter, survive life. I didn't have the emotional strength to bear the weight of a blind boy clinging to me, much less the weight of a father like Enzo telling me that this was indispensable. I can't enter your world, I warned. I can't live surrounded by risks I don't understand. He tilted his head, studying my words. But you already did, he replied. When you let my son touch your face. The sentence wasn't threatening. It was true, uncomfortable, unforgiving. I need to work, I murmured, trying to emotionally escape it. But he didn't move. He wouldn't allow it. Anna, he said, and the name in his mouth sounded like a sentence. I'm not asking you for anything. He paused for a long time. I'm telling you that you're already part of this, whether you like it or not. And before I could process it, he added, I'll make sure you stay alive. For his sake. The sentence should have scared me, and it did, but it also brought a strange sense of security. Uncomfortable, forbidden, necessary. Suddenly, the security guard's radio crackled loudly, breaking the moment. Suspicious activity at the east exit, a deep voice said. The guard looked at Enzo, awaiting instructions. Enzo didn't take his eyes off me. Do you have an exit today? He asked. I swallowed hard. Yes. Then I'll take you. I took a step back. It's not necessary. He gave a half smile, not of charm, but of disbelief. Do you really think someone like you can be left alone after becoming my son's weak point? The words pierced me like icy wind. Weak point. Me, a waitress, a miserable salary, calloused hands, a world too small. And yet, I was the weak point of someone too powerful. I didn't know if I wanted to cry, run, or scream at him. I didn't ask for this, I murmured. I know, Enzo replied. Neither did he. The father the world feared seemed for a second as vulnerable as his own son. But when my son puts his hand on your face, I see him breathe. His voice faltered for a split second. And I will protect what makes him breathe. A black car pulled up silently in front of the diner. The security guard opened the door. Enzo touched my arm, lightly, without force, without intrusion. And that was enough for my whole body to understand that I had no choice that night. Not because he was in charge, but because someone out there was hunting, and because Luca had asked for me. As we walked to the car, I felt the eyes of the entire restaurant glued to my back, some with pity, others with fear, others with morbid curiosity, but no one understood. No one knew that this wasn't glamour. It was risk, it was weight, it was destiny. When I got into the car, I heard Enzo saying something to the driver in a low voice, something like, alternative routes, and don't let anyone pass. He got in beside me and closed the door. The silence that settled inside wasn't comfortable. It wasn't hostile. It was necessary. A silence that said that, whether we liked it or not, his world and mine had just intersected, and that Luca was the thread that held everything together. And that was just the beginning. As the car entered the main avenue, the tinted windows reflected only shadows, mine and his. I tried to maintain my posture, look ahead, breathe normally. But the truth is, being next to Enzo in such a small, silent space made everything seem more dangerous than it already was. He didn't speak. He just observed the street, as if he had an invisible map of the entire city in his head. Are you scared? He asked without looking at me. The question came out so directly that I felt my stomach clench. Should I be? I replied. He finally turned his face. It depends. Fear keeps you alert. Panic makes you die. The simplicity of the sentence made my heart race. I wasn't used to living in worlds where every corner was dangerous, but he was. And now, for some reason I didn't yet understand, I was also part of that script. The car swerved sharply, and the driver accelerated as if fleeing from something or someone. I gripped the door handle and looked at Enzo, seeking explanations. He adjusted his shirt cuff, too calm for the speed. We're testing routes, he said. The driver confirmed with a stiff nod. Suspicious car at the previous corner, sir. I felt a shiver run down my spine. Because of me? I asked, not realizing I'd spoken aloud. No, Enzo said. Because of him. The image of Luca came so vividly to my mind that I felt my throat tighten. It wasn't just a blind child being protected. It was a child being hunted. This is about power? I asked, trying to understand a world that wasn't mine. No, he corrected. It's about revenge. The word fell between us like an iron weight. I pressed my fingers against my knee, trying not to tremble. And what does this revenge have to do with me? I asked. He looked at me in a way I wasn't prepared for. You brought him to life. I ran a hand over my face, trying to absorb it. But that doesn't make me a shield. He didn't deny it. It shouldn't. But if someone wants to hurt a man, it starts where he breathes. My heart pounded so hard I almost heard it. I'm not your son's heir, I replied dryly. He tilted his head. No, you are the ground. The car seemed smaller. The air seemed thicker. Because that phrase, simple and raw, wasn't an exaggeration. It was true, and I didn't know how to carry it. He rested his elbow on the doorframe and watched me for too long. When you touch Luca's face, he understands where he is, who's nearby, what's safe. Without sight, the world is chaos. You organize his chaos. I turned my face to the window, trying to cool my blood. That's affection, Enzo. It's not destiny. He gave a half smile, tired, like someone who's seen the world crumble. Affection is the only thing no one can buy. Maybe that's why it's so precious to him. I didn't know how to answer, because every word he said seemed to pierce layers of myself that I myself avoided touching. And that scared me more than the suspicious cars outside. The driver slowed down as he turned onto a narrower street, an alley I would never have dared to cross alone. The dim light from the streetlights reflected off the windows, casting shadows that seemed to double in size. Why are we here? I asked. Because I need to show you something without witnesses. My heart tightened. The car stopped. The driver got out first, checking the surroundings. Enzo opened the door on my side and gestured for me to get out. Trust me, he said. I laughed nervously. It's funny, but that phrase doesn't usually work in your world. He replied too seriously. But it needs to work in ours. I slowly got out of the car, the cold ground beneath my feet, the wind cutting through the air between the buildings. Enzo walked to a side door, an abandoned warehouse with graffiti-covered walls. He unlocked the door with a magnetic card, as if he'd used that place many times before. No eyes or ears enter here that I don't allow, he explained. Inside, the space was large, dark, and silent, with a faint smell of dust. In the center, there was a monitor connected to several cameras. Do you recognize this? He asked, pointing to an image. I almost vomited. It was the door to my house. My door. Filmed at night. This happened yesterday, he said. And it wasn't me. A chill ran down my spine like ice water. So, someone was there. Before the note. He nodded slowly. Yes. My stomach churned. And you knew and didn't tell me? His gaze hardened. Firm. I needed confirmation. I needed to know if it was coincidence or intention. The word intention made me tremble. And now? I asked, almost voiceless. He took a deep breath. Now I know it's intention. I leaned on the table, feeling my legs weaken. Why me? Why follow someone like me? He answered with the terrifying calm of someone who knows monsters. Because you're small enough to reach, and big enough to destroy him if you're taken out of the way. I put my hand to my chest, as if trying to hold back the escaping air. And Luca? I asked, because my mind was already racing towards the worst. Enzo closed his eyes for a second, not out of weakness, but from contained pain. Luca is in the eye of the storm, and anyone he touches becomes part of it. I took a deep breath, trying not to cry. I can't protect him. He looked directly at me. But you can anchor him, and that's rarer. I swallowed hard. And who will anchor me? I asked, unable to hold back the vulnerability that came out in the sentence. He approached, slowly, respecting my space, but without backing away. Me. The monitors flickered, illuminating his face in flashes. He seemed dangerous and human at the same time, a combination I didn't know whether to run from or stay with. I won't let them touch you, he said, each syllable cutting through the air between us. Because if they touch you, they touch him. And there, in that dark warehouse, smelling of dust and dangerous promises, I understood. No matter how much I tried to resist, the bond was already formed. The thread was already tied. And in the end, it was Luca who held the end, and who pulled us both toward the same destiny. The walk from the warehouse to the diner was silent, but not the comfortable kind of silence. It was a silence that was too full, too heavy, carrying all the secrets that had just been revealed. I looked out the window, watching the city rush by, but I couldn't see anything. My mind was stuck on the image from the security camera footage of my door, on the firm handwriting of the note, on the fact that someone had been near my daughter without my knowledge. Enzo, sitting beside me, maintained an upright posture, but his breathing betrayed tension. It was the first time I'd seen him like this, not furious, not violent, but worried, in a way that tore through the silence. "You need to trust me," he said suddenly, without taking his eyes off the street. "I know it seems impossible, but if you don't trust me, I can't protect Luca." I turned my face away. "And who protects me?" He finally looked at me. "Me." When we arrived at the diner, the atmosphere had returned to normal, as if the world inside had no idea of the hell that was beginning to unfold outside. Before I got out of the car, Enzo grabbed my arm, not forcefully, but firmly enough to prevent the emotional escape I was seeking. "You need to understand something," he said softly. "Luca doesn't choose people. He doesn't have that luxury. He feels, and what he felt in you. No one can force it." I tried to laugh to lighten the mood. "You talk as if I were some kind of miracle." He tilted his head. "To my son, you are." My heart pounded so hard it almost took my breath away. I got out before I could answer, or fall apart. The following hours at work were a blur. I waited tables, took orders, washed glasses, but my mind was stuck on the warehouse, the note, the footage, and what it meant to have become part of a war I couldn't see. I tried to act as if nothing had happened, but my hand trembled as I picked up trays, and whenever the diner door opened, my body stiffened, expecting shadows. When the doorbell rang louder, everything inside me froze, but it wasn't a threat. It was Luca, standing, in the center of the entrance, his hand touching the wall, searching for references, with a small smile because he recognized the smell of the place. Behind him, Enzo watched, as if holding the world in one hand and fear in the other. I dropped the cloth I was holding and went to him, instinctively, as if my body moved on its own. "Luca," I called. He turned toward my voice, his face illuminated by something pure, something that seemed like peace. "Anna," he murmured. He hesitantly reached out his hand until it touched my forearm. I knelt down to be at his level. "You came all the way here like this?" I asked, surprised. Enzo replied. "He insisted. He said he needed to feel you." The sentence was too much. It was too beautiful, too harsh, too dangerous. But when Luca touched my face again, carefully, delicately, as if he were rediscovering a place in his own body, everything inside me fell silent. The world vanished. Only the two of us remained on that small bridge between light and darkness. "What happened at school?" I asked, running my hand through his hair. Luca took a deep breath. "I heard someone say your name." My stomach churned. "Where?" He pointed to his ear. "Not a specific spot. Behind me, in the hallway. A voice I don't recognize." Enzo stepped forward, his face turning to stone. "Who said her name?" he asked, with the fatal calm that precedes storms. Luca shook his head. "I don't know. It was a man." He said, "Is it her?" The air around us froze. Enzo ran a hand through his hair, nervous in a restrained way. "They're already too close," he murmured. I felt my heart pounding so hard it felt like a drum. "What does that mean?" I asked. He answered bluntly, "That you can't be alone for another day." Luca held my hand tightly, and I understood what was behind that phrase. It wasn't just danger. It was attachment. It was fear. It was the emotional dependence of a boy who had no safe haven left but me. "Shall we go home?" I asked him, trying to lighten his mood. He nodded, but didn't let go of my hand, and Enzo observed every detail with a kind of expression I still couldn't decipher. Gratitude mixed with fear, hope mixed with guilt, paternal love mixed with a weight that only those who have lost too much know, the kind of look that tries to memorize everything that can be taken from the world. The walk back to the car was discreet, but I noticed twice as many security guards, watchful eyes, radios more active than before. Enzo put me in the back seat with Luca beside me. "Why is everyone so tense?" I asked. The driver accelerated before Enzo could answer. "Because we've already confirmed who was following you." My vision went dark for a moment. "Who?" He pressed his hand to his knee, as if holding back anger with his bones. "Someone who tried to get to my son before, and now thinks they can get to him through you." I put my hand to my mouth, trying to control my breathing. Luca sensed my tension and slid his hand to my chest. "Anna, I'm here." His words shattered me completely. Enzo's house was in a secluded gated community, surrounded by high walls and security tighter than many banks. When the gate opened, I felt the weight of the decision entering with me. Luca walked slowly, but smiled because he knew I was there. The house smelled of wood, security, and buried memories. Enzo led me to a spacious room with warm light and heavy curtains. "This is where you'll stay for now," he said, "until I sort this out." I turned immediately. "I can't stay in a mobster's house." He stared at me, almost indignant. "Do you think you have a choice after the note on your door?" I swallowed hard. I didn't. Luca groped his way to the sofa and sat down, patting the space next to him for me to sit too. I sat. Enzo stood, watching the two of them as if trying to understand a difficult formula. "Anna," he said, lower, more truthfully, "I don't know how to protect someone who won't let me get close. But you, he lets you." He looked at his son, then at me. "That puts you at risk. But it also puts you in the most important place in his life." My throat tightened. "I don't know if I can carry this." He took a step. "You're already carrying it." I was about to answer when the door behind me opened without warning. One of Enzo's men rushed in, his face pale. "Sir, they found something else." Enzo turned with the rigidity of someone expecting the worst. "What now?" The security guard held out a tablet. "School cameras." The exact time Luca heard her name. The video showed an empty hallway. Then a silhouette passed quickly, its face covered. And then, the voice. Low, hoarse, somehow recognizable in a way I couldn't explain. "It's her." Enzo clenched his teeth. "I know that voice." The security guard added, "And he knows you." I leaned back on the sofa, feeling the ground slip away from under me. Luca, noticing my reaction, climbed onto the armchair and touched my face. "Anna, are you crying?" His gentleness destroyed me. I held his little hand, trying to be strong, even though I was scared inside. "It's okay, Luca. I'm here." Enzo watched the scene as if witnessing a miracle and torment at the same time. "I need to resolve this today," he said, his voice steady, but full of something deeper, urgency. "But you two aren't leaving this house." The security guard left. The door closed. Silence fell. Enzo approached, not as a boss, not as a threat, but as a man afraid of losing what little he has left. "Anna," he said, his voice deep, sincere, pained. "I can't let him lose you." I felt my breath catch in my throat. "And I can't lose my life, Enzo." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that betrayed exhaustion. "Then let me protect you." Luca held my face in both hands, and in that simple gesture I understood everything. It wasn't a choice. It was a calling, a thread pulled by a child who only knew the world through touch. Enzo knelt before us, as if that moment were greater than any power he had ever possessed. "Anna, stay." The word hung in the air. Luca squeezed my face, and I felt destiny being decided between a father, an exhausted woman, and a boy who saw everything through his heart. I hadn't expected his house to be silent, truly silent. Not the kind that happens when a sound fades away, but the kind that arrives when everyone is holding their breath at the same time. The security guards moved like shadows, without steps, without voice, without presence. The house was large, elegant, but there was something sad about the walls, as if someone had torn down photos and left only the marks. Enzo walked ahead of me, but not in a hurry. He took slow, measured steps, as if each movement was calculated so as not to startle Luca, who held my hand firmly. "Has he always been like this?" I asked, cautious. Enzo let out a short sigh. "No. Before, he ran." It hurt to hear. It hurt because it meant loss before I even arrived. When we entered a smaller room, lit by yellow lamps, Luca let go of my hand and went straight to a fluffy rug that seemed chosen just for him. Carefully, he knelt down and stretched his fingers, familiarizing himself with the space. "Did you leave this here for him?" I asked. Enzo nodded. "He likes the texture. It helps him orient himself." I knelt beside the boy, and Luca found my face easily, as if he had an invisible map just for me. "Anna, stay here?" he asked. It was so simple, so pure, so devastating that I felt my chest break in silence. "I'll stay," I replied, and I stayed. Enzo watched, but without intruding, as if that moment were too sacred to touch. The radio noise disrupted the fragile peace of the room. 2 security guards rushed past the door, exchanging codes, short words, tense sounds. Enzo immediately stood up, pulled by an instinct I would never have. "What happened?" I asked, even knowing he didn't owe me any explanations. He turned, his face tense, as if he carried the weight of an entire city on his shoulders. "Someone tried to access the condominium with a cloned car," My stomach churned. Why? He took a deep breath. Because now they know where you are. The responsibility fell on me like a stone. It wasn't Luca who was putting my life at risk. It was my bond with him that was putting his in danger. And that was worse. As the house shook with anxiety, Luca instinctively approached me, searching for my hand like someone searching for light in a dark room. I touched his face, and he rested his forehead against my palm. "Is everything all right?" he asked. "How do you explain a war to a child born into its midst?" "Yes, Luca," I replied, even though my body contradicted the entire sentence. He smiled slightly. "You make everything better." I felt Enzo standing behind me, and for the first time, I perceived something broken inside him, something trying to rebuild itself with the crumbs of hope his son still held on to. Enzo called me into the hallway. "I need to talk to you alone." My heart raced. "Luca doesn't like it when I walk away," I warned. He glanced over my shoulder at the boy, who was already lying on the rug, calm because my voice was still close. "It'll be quick." I held my breath and followed him. The hallway was wide, but it felt narrow with the weight falling on us. "Anna," he began, his voice deep and firm, "I need you to understand exactly the risk you're taking." I leaned against the wall, trying not to collapse. "I already understand. Someone broke into my house." He shook his head. "That wasn't a warning. It was a test." "A test of what?" I asked, because I needed to know the size of the abyss. He moved closer, not aggressively, but intensely. "A test to see how important you are." My pulse quickened. "I'm not important." He arched an eyebrow, as if I'd said the most absurd thing in the universe. "You're vital." The word hit me like a shot of compressed air. "I shouldn't be," I whispered. "But you are," he said. "And in our world, vital things have a price." I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to contain the panic. "And what's the price of a waitress?" He stared at me so deeply it seemed to pierce my skin. "Enough to start a war." I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to believe it. But then he opened a side door and showed me something I'll never forget. Screens. Many. On all of them, different angles of the city. Streets, buildings, school entrances. And in the left corner, my street, my door, my building. "You monitor all of this?" I asked, horrified. He shook his head. "Not all of it." He pointed to the screen showing my street. "Only what matters." The revelation stunned me. "Since when?" I asked, almost voiceless. "Since yesterday." I swallowed hard. "You installed cameras on my door 24 hours ago." He moved closer. "I installed protection, because someone had already put up a threat." The psychological impact of this made me lean against the table behind me. I didn't know if I wanted to scream, cry, or run away from that man. "I don't want this." He tilted his head. "But you want to live, don't you?" The brutality of the phrase scared me. I tried to breathe slowly, but it was impossible. "I don't want to become part of any of this." He replied with the raw truth I was trying to avoid. "You already are." I almost laughed nervously. "Just because a child held my face?" He shook his head. "Just because a child found light in the darkness." I wanted to be strong. I wanted to be cold. I wanted to be someone who could set boundaries with a man like him. But the truth is, Luca had pulled me in with his small hands. And now I was trapped. Not out of fear, but out of attachment. "What if I say I won't stay?" I asked, without courage, but honestly. Enzo took 2 steps until he was too close, but didn't touch me. "If you say you're leaving, Luca will break." I felt my eyes burn. "I'm not his mother." "No," Enzo said in a strange, almost broken tone. "But you're the first safe haven he's had since he went blind." The words hit me hard, as if someone had ripped away my structure and left me exposed. "I didn't know," I murmured. "And how could you know?" he replied. "Nobody ever let him touch your face. Nobody ever let him get that close. Nobody ever stayed." The word echoed. Stayed. Luca had said it in the hospital, and Enzo was now repeating it as confirmation. I put my hand to my mouth, holding back tears. "I'm not ready." He took a deep breath. "Nobody is. Not even me." And that was the most disarming thing of all. Seeing the Mafia boss admit that he was lost too. We went back into the living room and found Luca asleep on the rug, one little hand outstretched in the air as if he'd searched for my face before falling asleep. The scene broke my heart. I walked over to him and covered him with a light blanket. Enzo stood in the doorway, watching, as if he saw something he couldn't put into words. "He never falls asleep this fast," he murmured. "Never," I ran my hand through the boy's hair, and he sighed, relaxed. He senses when he's safe, I explained. And you give him security. Enzo looked away, as if that truth hurt more than it comforted. And what do I give you? He asked, softly, unexpectedly. I turned slowly. The question wasn't meant to be provocative. It was sincerity, pure, raw, uncomfortable. Trouble, I replied. He gave a sad half smile. I give myself trouble. You just exist. And the way he said exist made me feel something I didn't want to feel, something too dangerous to live there. Before I could answer, Luca moved his head and, still asleep, held my hand, as if he wanted to make sure I wouldn't disappear when he closed his eyes. What I didn't know yet, and what Enzo already knew, was that that image, that simple gesture, that small hand holding mine, would be exactly the reason why, hours later, someone would make the worst possible decision, to try to drag Luca away from the only place where he felt safe, from me. And nothing, absolutely nothing, in his father's world would remain standing after that. I don't know how long we stayed there, the three of us breathing the same heavy air in the silent room, while the house seemed to hold its breath along with us. The blanket covering Luca rose and fell slowly, in a rhythm that calmed my chest and, at the same time, frightened me. Because, for the first time, I was clearly aware that an entire life depended on things I did, without thinking. Putting my hand on his hair, speaking softly, not disappearing when the door closed. Enzo was leaning against the side of the bookcase, his arms crossed, looking at us as if he wanted to memorize that scene. It wasn't a scene from a movie, nor one of power. It was a scene of a strange, patched-together family, a family born from a flaw in someone's plan. The first sign that something was very wrong didn't come from a scream or a gunshot. It came from the light. The house lights flickered rapidly, twice, as if someone had touched an invisible wire. Enzo raised his head immediately, his whole body going on alert. "This isn't a power outage," he murmured. Then, the silence was broken by the static of radios outside. An urgent voice exploded in the hallway. "Perimeter compromised! Movement on the north wall!" My heart raced so fast I thought I was going to faint. Enzo was already at the door, transformed into something else. Not the man who had spoken to me in the hallway, nor the father kneeling at the edge of the rug. He was the boss, the man the world feared. And strangely, at that moment, that's what gave me some kind of security. 2 security guards entered the room, closing the door behind us, their hands near their weapons, their eyes scanning every corner. "They managed to get past the first gate," one of them said, breathless. "We don't know how many there are." I knelt beside Luca, who was starting to stir, sensing the atmosphere change. "Anna?" he murmured, sleepy, but already with his hand in the air, searching for my face. I reached for his hand before the anxiety rose. "I'm here," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. Enzo gave quick, sharp orders that I couldn't process. I only saw men moving, doors being locked, something heavy being dragged downstairs. The kind of preparation you only see when war arrives in your living room. "There's a safe room at the back of the house," one of the security guards said, turning his attention to us. "We need to get them both out of here now." I swallowed hard. "I'm not going to let him wake up without me," Enzo answered before the man. "She's going with him." The firmness of the statement left no room for discussion. Luca was already more awake, his chest rising faster. "What's happening?" he asked, his voice trembling. I ran my hand over his face. "Nothing we can't face together, okay?" Was it a lie? It was. But sometimes the only way to keep a child alive is to hold fear by the neck and pretend it doesn't exist. We left the room surrounded by armed men. The hallway was different, with emergency lights on, and a silent alarm pulsing somewhere in the house. I felt the floor vibrate with footsteps I couldn't see. Luca squeezed my hand so hard my fingers ached. "Anna, talk to me," he pleaded, his voice small. "Tell me where we are." I began to narrate everything. We're walking down the hallway. There's a soft rug under our feet. To the right, there's a large painting. It looks like a city at night. To the left, there's a closed window, and I'm next to you, holding your hand. It was simple, almost childlike, but I felt his body relax a little. He needed a map, even without seeing it. The secure room looked like a mix between a bunker and an expensive hotel guest room. Reinforced walls, a heavy door with an electronic lock, its own ventilation, a large bed, a sofa, a monitor mounted on the wall showing various angles of the house. When the door slammed shut behind us with a heavy click, I understood the gravity of what was happening outside. Enzo stayed outside for a few seconds, talking to the men. The door was still open, but his presence filled the entire passage. "Are you coming in?" I asked, more abruptly than I intended. He hesitated. Instinct told him to stay outside, fighting, but his gaze went to his son, and that decided it. "I'm coming in." When the lock clicked, the metallic sound sent a shiver down my spine. We were locked in, protected, and trapped. The monitor showed black and white images outside. Men running near the wall, cars moving at the entrance to the condominium, shadows trying to get closer and being blocked by other shadows. Luca squeezed my arm. "Are there many people?" I didn't lie. "There are, but no one will get here." He took a deep breath, his chest still racing. "I hate when it gets all dark inside," he said softly. That's when I understood. For him, it wasn't just the fear of what might get in. It was the fear of being trapped in a darkness he couldn't control. "Luca, come here," I asked. He stood up slowly, guided by my voice, until he was right in front of me, so close I could feel his warm breath. "Put your hands here," I said, guiding his fingers to my face. He obeyed, his fingers caressing my cheeks, my forehead, my chin. "I'm here. Can you see me?" He nodded, his empty eyes filled with something alive. "I can." Enzo watched, standing beside him, with an expression I couldn't describe. It was seconds, maybe minutes, but in that touch I felt his world anchor itself a little, as if, while my features were there, the rest could collapse without lifting him from the ground. A loud bang outside interrupted the moment. The monitor showed a quick flash on one of the walls, followed by smoke. "Flash grenade," Enzo explained, in a tone too technical for that scenario. "They're trying to confuse the security." I bit my lip. "Are you sure this door holds us?" He looked at me, serious. "If this door falls, it's no longer a house. It's open war." The silence that followed was worse than the noise, because it carried the possibility of that being true. Luca was trembling. I held his shoulders. "Do you trust me?" I asked. He nodded without thinking. Enzo stared at me, and I saw in his eyes the unspoken question. "And do you trust me?" I didn't answer, but I also didn't let go of his son's hand. The attack lasted less than the hours that passed inside that room seemed. Gradually, the images on the monitor began to change. The cars moved away, the shadows receded. The voices on the radio, which had previously been tense and confused, took on a victorious tone. Perimeter retaken. They retreated. Enzo took a deep breath for the first time since we entered. "Is it over?" I asked, disbelieving. He shook his head. "That part, yes, but they were just testing the limits." Luca sat on the bed, exhausted. "They wanted to take me?" he asked, with a clarity I wasn't prepared for. Enzo closed his eyes for a moment before answering. "They wanted to get to me, and the easiest way is through you." The boy swallowed hard. "And through her too?" he added, pointing in my direction. His question fell into the room like a silent bomb. I sat beside the bed, unsure whether to answer like an adult, or someone as lost as he was. "Yeah," I assumed. "Now I'm part of this mess." Luca frowned. "Sorry," he murmured, and that broke something inside me. "Hey, no. I cupped his face in my hands. "You'll never apologize for existing. Understand?" He took a deep breath. "You could have left when I touched you at the diner." I smiled sadly. "I could have, but I couldn't." He tilted his head. "Why?" I looked at Enzo, then back at the boy. "Because there are people you just don't abandon, even when it would be easier." When we finally left the safe room, the house smelled of distant smoke and dried adrenaline. Some furniture had been dragged around. Doors were locked with furniture. Radios crackled. Men walked past with fight scars, but all were breathing. No one had died this time. Luca walked beside me, his hand firm in mine, but his face tired, as if he had aged several years in a few hours. Enzo stood in the middle of the main room, talking to one of his men. He gestured little, but his voice was low and sharp. When he saw me, his tone changed. "Everything will be different from today on," he said, looking directly at me. "Different how?" I asked, knowing I wouldn't like the answer. "You're not going back home," he said, without anesthesia. "You and your daughter are coming here." The reflex was automatic. "No, my life is there. My story is there." He gave a humorless half-smile. "Your life was there. Now if you go back, it won't last long." The lump in my throat tightened. "You can't decide this for me." He took 2 steps closer but didn't intrude. "I can decide for my son. and he wants you alive. That gives me every reason in the world. I looked at Luca, who couldn't see me, but seemed to feel everything. Do you want me to stay here? I asked. He squeezed my hand. I do. Between survival and pride, I knew which option a mother chooses. I thought of my daughter, of the castle drawing, of the way she said she wanted a place where no one would hurt me. I thought of my front door on the screens, of the firm handwriting on the note, of the hoarse voice saying, "It's her." And I thought of Luca's hands on my face, trying to see something in the darkness. The choice had already been made long before it was spoken. I just hadn't yet had the courage to accept it. "My daughter is coming here," I finally said, my voice faltering slightly. "But I have one condition." Enzo's eyes narrowed. "What?" "I won't be your pawn," I replied. "I won't be a bargaining chip, an excuse for nothing, a facade for nothing. I'm here for him, and for my daughter. That's all." He stared at me for far too long, as if assessing how much truth there was in that sentence. In the end, he nodded slowly. "You're not my pawn," he said. "You're the only thing I can't control in this house." For some reason, that scared me more than any weapon in the hands of any enemy. But it was also the most honest thing he had ever said to me. Luca yawned, still tired, resting his head on my arm. Enzo looked at the scene, and for a moment, let his guard down. There was no boss there, no thief, no mobster, no legend. There was only a man who had almost lost his son again, and who knew that if I hadn't been there he might have lost him forever. "Thank you," he murmured, so softly I almost didn't hear. It wasn't the thank you of someone used to receiving. It was the thank you of someone who knows he owes more than he can pay. I didn't answer aloud. I just ran my hand through Luca's hair, as if to say, for him, it's okay. That day, when it finally got dark and the house began to recover from the attack, I sat on the sofa with Luca leaning against me and realized there was no turning back. The invisible waitress from the diner now slept in a mansion surrounded by armed men. The mother, who lived in fear of not paying the electricity bill, now feared something much bigger. And the blind son of the Mafia boss had found the only face the world couldn't take from him without starting a war. I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling the weight and the privilege of that place. The enemy was still out there. The hoarse voice still lingered somewhere in the city, repeating my name in hallways and school doorways. The note was still a promise. The cameras still showed streets I might never walk alone again. But inside, in that space between Luca's breath and Enzo's heavy gaze, there was something no weapon could control. An unlikely bond, born from flashes of light in the dark, from small hands groping faces, from an exhausted woman who decided to stay when the whole world told her she should run. And sometimes, it is precisely this type of choice, made in silence, without glamour, without witnesses, that changes the ending of stories that everyone thinks they already know. If this story touched you in any way, if there was a moment when you simply held your breath, then comment below which scene kept echoing in your head. Was that when Luca touched her face for the first time, trying to see someone who hadn't run away? Was that when he asked if she was going to disappear? Or was it the moment the house darkened, the attack began, and she realized she was already part of a world she never chose? I want to know, which scene impacted you the most? And I also want you to tell me, where are you hearing this story from? Which city? Which country? Let's turn the comments into a living map of shadow hearts. Comment below, and let's see how far this community can go. And do me and everyone here with you a favor. Reply to someone else's comment. This isn't just a channel. It's a space where every person who comments becomes part of the story, where their theories, emotions, and opinions fuel the universe we're building together. Talk to each other. Discuss. Ask each other questions. Let this comment become a meeting point. And of course, if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, because the stories that follow will be even more intense, deeper, and more dangerous, and you don't want to find out only halfway. Now it's your turn. Comment where you're watching from and what part gave you the most goosebumps. I'll see you in the comments. And in the next chapter of this universe where a single touch can change destinies.